Hi there, I'm going to talk about some rendering techniques as it applies to lighting. And I'm going to talk about pencil blending. I'm going to talk about cross-hatching with pencil, and then I'm going to talk about blending with charcoal. So it's three different techniques to achieve lighting when you're trying to light forms. So I think I'll start with the cross-hatching. So I'm going to set these out of the way for just a moment and come back here to the cross-hatching. Now, there's some rules with this type of cross-hatching. There's different kinds, but one is you want to keep your pencil sharp. And the other is you lift with each stroke, and I'll be talking about this again while I'm doing it. And then you don't change the pressure with various pencils. The idea of these pencils is they go from lighter to darker, or darker to lighter, whichever way you want to look at it. And so when you want darker lines, you simply pick up a darker pencil. When you want lighter lines, you can pick up a lighter pencil for what we're doing here. This is rendering. So they kind of go, 4H, 3H, 2H, HB. HB's in the middle. Then they go 2B, 3B, 4B, and on up to 9B, 10B as they get darker. So lighter with the H's, darker with the B's. You have HB in the middle. Then there's a whole variety of pencils, but that's the gist of it. H gets lighter and harder, B gets softer and darker. So with this cone that I cross-hatched, and I used cross-hatching technique for it, I had this variety of pencils here, and I had them sharp. So I was doing some techniques here, and I'm going to do them again for you. Some things we want to do with each stroke is we want to make sure that we're lifting with each stroke, that we're not going back and forth and making fish hooks. And then another thing is you really, really have to keep the pencil sharp, because as soon as your pencils dull down, you're going to get smudges. So also, I would really recommend having a piece of paper under your hand. I'm going to grab one now. Having a piece of paper under your hand when you're doing any of these techniques, because our hands are oily, and the oil from our hands will get into our paper and make our paper oily. If you put your hand on a mirror, you always find out that, our hands are oily. They leave residue. So to not smudge your cross-hatching, and also to keep your paper from getting oily, I call it a guard sheet. Just have a piece of paper under your hand when you're doing these techniques, if your hand's resting on your paper. So these strokes are up to you, however many you want to do, 5, 7, 12. And then the length of them is kind of up to you, because this is kind of wristy. This is a rendering technique. So you don't want to have to try to drag the pencil and make really, really long lines. For this type of cross-hatching, it's short strokes. So the way I achieved this and this was I started with a light pencil. In this case, it's a 4H. And I made some lines going in one direction. Now, those are hatched lines. If I go over those, I have now cross-hatched. I've cross-hatched. And you'll notice I'm going at diagonals here. I didn't start with right angles like this, because if you do that, you're going to get kind of this screen door effect, and it's more textural. It can work for some things, but I would recommend against going at right angles to start this. Okay, back to my cross-hatching here with my 4H. This is still 4H. I'm just putting some lines over the previous set of lines. I'm going in different directions, and I'll turn my paper to my advantage. I don't want to have to turn my arm, going all the way around, so I'll just turn the paper to whichever way it is most advantageous for me to lay down my next set of hatched lines. And you just keep building up an area with this particular value. I mean, if everything is this value, light and dark when we're talking about value, if everything is this value, then this is the only pencil you'd use, and you just build up this, mid-tone with your 4H pencil. Cross-hatching is really, really cool because it's mark making, and people dig looking at mark making. They dig looking at getting up close to drawings and seeing what techniques you use to make the particular drawing, or painting, or anything else you make. People love that. So with this 4H, I can't really get any darker than I've gotten. if I want to get darker, I pick up a progressively darker pencil. So, I mean, there's 3H I could go to, but I'll just go to 2H here and crosshatch right on top of that. Inevitably, you're going to go over some lines the same direction that you've already gone because there's only so many directions you can go. But, you try to avoid that, especially with each pencil. So I get a little darker with the 2H. I can pick up an HB and get a little darker yet. And keep in mind, I'm not changing the pressure of with my hand on this pencil for this type of cross-hatching. I'm simply picking up progressively darker pencils. And then, if I want to get darker yet, I can pick up a 2B. The beauty of doing this gradually is it makes your values much richer than if you just start with a dark pencil. It gives your darks a much greater depth. It's more atmospheric rather than just a flat, value put down with a super dark pencil. 3H, I can get darker. Not applying any more pressure with these pencils. Excuse me, not 3H, 3B. 4B, we can get a little darker. And then you can go up higher and higher in the Bs to get them darker and darker. And you get progressively really nice blended transitions going on here with cross-hatching. This drawing, I started everything, I think, with a 4H and just worked on top of it to create this lighting for this cone. So look at that for just a moment. I want to talk about some pencil blending techniques now. And this is on drawing paper. And the way I achieve this pencil blending is, once again, you're not going to change the pressure with various pencils. You're going to apply the same amount of pressure. And you're going to use a blending stump that you've only used for pencil previously, that you haven't used for charcoal, and you haven't used it for pastels or anything else. You just want graphite on the tips of these. Preferably they're clean to begin with, but with a blending stump, you use graphite for graphite. You build up slowly, and then just like the pencil cross-hatching, you got the H's get lighter. It's harder graphite, so the lines are lighter. With the B's, it's softer graphite, so the lines get darker, or the strokes. So the way I achieved this type of blending here is I had maybe a 4H here, and I started doing something like this. This is similar to hatching, but I'm just kind of going back and forth, and I'm not pressing hard. I don't want to dent my paper here. I'm not embossing here. I'm just building up value. You want to respect the paper surface. You maintain the integrity of the paper surface because it has a relationship with whatever it is that whatever drawing tools you're using. So if I go to a little darker pencil here, now this is a 2H. I can blend right on top of that. And you can even use the side of it a little more. You don't have to just use the point. Sometimes the side is even more advantageous than the point. And then I can pick up an HB and get a little darker right on top of what I've already shaded. And then I can pick up a 2B, go right over the previous value. Once again, this gets much richer darks than if you just use a dark pencil right away. By progressively getting darker, you get richer darks. This is a 3B. So, once again, you don't change the pressure. You just go right on top of what you've already put down. And then a 4B, you just get darker and darker if you want. Then after you've done this, sometimes it's kind of cool just to do it with the strokes, but when you have a blending stump, you can then come in and sort of blend these in together. Blend these in together and get your transitions from lighter to darker. And another cool thing about this, after you have some graphite built up on the edge of your tip, it can even serve as a lighter value to move across even further. So this is rendering value transitions, with pencil to achieve this kind of effect that I did with this box. Because, planes on a box, they're not all going to be the same value. They can go from darker to lighter. Cast shadows are going to go from darker to lighter oftentimes. Different planes of the box will have different values. The background might have a variety of values. So keep that in mind for pencil technique renderings. And look at that for just a second. I'm going to shift to some charcoal technique for rendering for lighting. So be careful I don't knock everything off my drawing table here. I rendered that cylinder in charcoal, but the way I did that, and it's really kind of cool, especially if you're doing a big finished still life, is I taped off, just like I did here, an area that I was going to do my charcoal drawing in. So I taped that off. And then what I did for this is I had some charcoal powder, and I had a cotton ball or a cosmetic pad will suffice as well. But you can also do this. Let me dump just a little bit of it here. I got to be careful if I dump too much. My video is shot, and I got to start over, and then I got to draw everything again. So that's probably a little bit too much. What I'm going to do is take some of that out, set it aside somewhere. If I need this, I can use it. I'm just setting it up there. And then I take this cotton ball and I rub this charcoal all over my drawing. Now, the drawing that I had underneath there was dark. It was dark line drawing, and it was like done in like a 4B pencil. So I should have mentioned that. That cone that I drew had to be dark enough so when I do rub all of this charcoal over the drawing, that the cone will still show through. I'm developing a mid-tone here is what I'm doing. And, you want to get it nice and even. Maybe the cone's not real visible to you on the video, but I can see it just fine. And so after you get your mid-tone down, kind of smoothing it out, you have what I call a point of departure, because this mid-tone is put down, and it's not sacred, guys. If you put your finger there and smudge it, big deal. You can always go over it again. So when you're drawing this cone, when you're starting to light this cone, don't worry about if you violate this background a little bit. It's a point of departure that we go lighter and darker from. This is a reductive method in that we are taking away the light now. So with this cone, if the light's coming from the left, I'll start erasing the light, which is the same thing I did here. With this kneaded eraser, you have to use a kneaded eraser for this. This one's dirty, it's full of charcoal. And you start coming in, and everywhere that there's light hitting the form, you bring in your kneaded eraser and you erase. And that would probably include a tabletop here too, because if light's hitting that form, light's also going to be hitting the tabletop. So you erase around your cast shadow, you erase around your cone, this tabletop here, so to speak. I'm not going to go all the way through this, but I want you to get the gist of what I'm doing here. The cast shadow is going to be here, which is the equivalent of this. And you start erasing all the light you can. Now, if this were going to be a finished drawing, I'd erase all the light, all the way here as well. And once I have that all erased, once I'm finished with that, I can come in with charcoal. Now, what I used here initially was some vine charcoal to start adding in the coarse shadows and such. So you can start building up your darker darks now with some vine charcoal. The great thing about vine charcoal is that it doesn't stick too much. It doesn't behave itself. But it's great for just establishing your darks rather than just coming in with, a more compressed charcoal that you're going to commit to more. Because if I blend this with my finger, some of it's going to go away. Now, I like blending with my fingers and with the stumps, but if you blend with your fingers, make sure your fingers are completely dry. Wash them and wipe as much oil off them as you can, so you don't get oil into your blending there. And then I'm going to take out here a little piece of compressed charcoal. And this would be later, guys, after you have your light erased and you've developed all your lights and darks. With a piece of compressed charcoal, and you don't press hard, you can start getting even darker darks in here. And, progressively blending them with your fingers. Take your time with it. And this type of drawing goes from general, which is where we are now, to specific, where you get any details and any tightening up towards the end. We don't worry about detail. We don't worry about all the edges being perfect, at the beginning. We worry about getting all of our lights and darks established. My kneaded eraser was actually shedding. They usually don't, but that's called eraser dirt. That's what I call it. You can start building up your cast shadow also and start blending it in. And just progressively building up your values until you're happy with your whole range of lights, middles, darks, reflected light, value contrast in your cast shadow. If you have a dark background, that you don't make it solid black, that you show some value range in the background. And then, you can come back in at any time and continue drawing with your eraser. This is reductive, we call it. It's additive when we're adding the values, but it's reductive when we're taking away the light with the eraser. And the charcoal removes so nicely. One last thing I want to mention before I stop this is, one thing is I'm making a mess. Over here on this cone, and what would eventually happen on this, over here on this cylinder, and what would eventually happen on this cone, we have what's called an inferred line here. You may be able to see somewhat of an edge there, but this looks more realistic, more three-dimensional if we don't put the darn line there. The idea with all these studies I'm showing today is that there's no lines. It's just values against values, darks against lights, darks against middle tones, etc. So by having this cylinder against a darker background, we see the edge here. No lines, it's light against dark. The bottom of the cylinder, you're going to get, probably a very skinny shadow is what it is, the very bottom of it. So by having this, and the rest of the cylinder drawn, there's no need to put a line there, just as there'd be no need to do that here. So once again, all three of these techniques are showing modeling and lighting techniques without using any lines in your drawing. With the crosshatch lines are lines, but without drawing lines per se. When your charcoal study's finished, you can spray fix it if you wish. I'd spray, you spray it outside, you lean it against a wall. Don't ever spray it sitting down flat because your nozzle can drip. You sit it against a wall, shake your spray fixative, spray it top to bottom, nice even coat. Let it dry for 5-10 minutes. You can do 2 or 3 coats if you wish. When that's all dry, you slowly, and I can't emphasize this strongly enough, take your tape off. Slowly take your tape off, so you end up with a nice clean edge of your finished drawing. Okay. I think I should probably point out quickly before I end this completely. This is vine charcoal. This is compressed charcoal. Vine charcoal is very brittle, and it's like a twig. It's like a stick, and it cracks very easily. The compressed charcoal is just that. It's more compressed, and it's not going to snap as easily, but it's going to give you more so-called permanent darks than will the vine charcoal. Vine charcoal is great at preliminary stages, but as you're rendering further and further, you would use your compressed charcoal more, and then eventually, and this one isn't sharp, but you could come in with, I don't think I have it here handy, I have it somewhere. You can come with charcoal pencils, and even get tighter rendering around edges and such. And then lastly, if you wish, you can use a white piece of charcoal or a charcoal pencil, and this has to be conservative, man. You can just touch a couple of highlights in there, you know, just barely touching them in there. I did it here already. If you use too much white charcoal, it looks like cake icing. So it always has to be real conservative if you're going to use white charcoal. So that's it for today. Thank you for your time.